Greetings, welcome, Swagatham. A young army officer of the rank of second lieutenant, a Christian by name Samuel Kamaleson, has been dismissed from service on the ground that he refused to participate in the regimental religious marches. The regiment to which he belonged comprised mostly of Sikhs and Rajputs. So their regimental religious facilities did not include a place for Christian worship. There was temple and there was religious facilities for the Sikhs, say Gurudwara, and for the Jats temples. But for a Christian member of the platoon or the regiment, there was no church. So he refused to participate on these religious marches, which has been interpreted or understood by his superiors as an act of indiscipline, insubordination. And all of us know that army does not brook insubordination. On the ground that complete discipline and total subordination to the authority of higher officers are absolutely vital for the cohesion and morale of the army. This case was brought to the Delhi High Court. It was heard by a bench of two judges. And the honorable judges, after listening to detailed arguments, came to the conclusion that the action of termination of services initiated against the insubordinate officer, Samuel Kamaleson, was justified. Now, this is the news item, and this is all I could gather from the news report available to me. I have to admit that I have not read the verdict issued by the Delhi High Court. I am basing my observations and thoughts entirely on the media report available to me. How do I view the situation? First of all, I wish the honorable judges had addressed, I do not know if they have addressed, but I wish they had addressed the all important question that freedom of religion, and which includes freedom of conscience, without which freedom of religion is a non-entity, as enshrined in Article 25 of the Indian Constitution, is a fundamental right. Now, I certainly agree that fundamental rights are not absolute. Fundamental rights, or the scope and applicability of fundamental rights, can be modified by certain stipulated considerations. For example, national interests, the integrity and security of the country. So there are certain conditions, say in the interest of public order, morality, etc. The application of the scope of Article 25 can be limited, restricted, modified. But whether or not a Christian second lieutenant refusing to participate on the basis of his conscientious objection to participating in a religious march belonging to other religions, which is not merely a march but which also has implications of worship, does not amount to a coercive intervention with a fundamental right, and whether or not this can be uniformly applied to all people. I do not know, because there's a gray area in law as far as I know. This is a very important question to consider. Is the present situation, the situation within which this act of discipline, this punishment is framed, a good enough ground to tamper with or to modify the scope of Article 25, which is a fundamental, which pertains to a fundamental right? This is one issue. The second issue is the judges invoke the idea of secularism. They hold the dismissed second lieutenant guilty of not having respected the spirit of secularism. Now, I'm sure the honorable judges know that secularism stipulates equal distance of the state from all religions. In which case, why is it that there is no place of worship for a Christian, whereas there are places of worship for people of all other faiths? Is this intended or otherwise? It may be purely accidental, unwitting discrimination, admissible to the Indian notion of secularism. But I don't think enough consideration seems to have been given to it. And I don't know if the arguing counsel pressed this point. I have no idea. I'm just flagging some issues. And at this time, my memory goes back many, many years to my being invited to Ambala, to the huge Air Force camp, Air Force station in Ambala, where I was invited to inaugurate a church meant for the Air Force personnel. There was a temple, then there was an empty room in between, then there was a Gurudwara, then there was a mosque. Not in elaborate detail, but the place is designated. And the empty room in between was to be converted into a chapel. And I was called upon to bless and dedicate that place as a chapel for the Christian members of the armed forces to worship there if they chose to. Obviously, much seems to have changed since then. And therefore, this is something that merits our attention. Nothing remains the same. And especially for minority communities, it is unrealistic to insist or expect that provisions, attitudes, considerations that were obtained, say, 30 years ago, would continue to be obtained. Attitudes do change. They change with times. It's only natural. There's no point in finding fault with anyone. The best thing to do is to realize that circumstances have changed and therefore to think very clearly about how to deal with these changed circumstances, how to work out one's coping strategies within these changing circumstances. So I'm very convinced that a very substantial change has happened within the army ethos. This much is very clear to me. Now, what the honorable judges should also have considered is this: what indeed is the connection between religious worship and the morale of the army? I submit in all humility, after paying due respects to the authority of the honorable judges and expressing my unlimited respect for the majesty of law, that the logic that the honorable court used here is flawed. I find it very difficult to believe that a second lieutenant seeking exemption from the duty to be part of a religious march does not pertain to the religion that he wants to practice. In other words, an arrangement which coerces him to be part of the practice of other religions has a substantial bearing on the morale of the army. Or to put it differently, I do not know to what extent Samuel Kamalasan's ready willingness to participate in that religious march belonging to religions that he did not believe in or practice. To what extent his willingness of that kind would contribute to the morale of the Indian army, I cannot understand. For the life of me, I cannot understand. So I have to say that the logic or the rationale or the ratio that the Honorable Court, the High Court of Delhi has used is flawed in my very humble opinion. Now, I want to deal with another issue which is going to be of immense importance in the days to come. Because this particular instance is very significant, as I said, in signaling a very fundamental change. And a community that is vigilant, a community that is alive to realities, a community that doesn't want to bury its head under the sand like ostriches, will want to take note of it and read the message therefrom. And that's what I propose to do from now onwards. Just a few words. I wouldn't make it too long. Now, the question that comes up first and foremost is this. Under the existing circumstances, what should members of the Christian community think about joining the army? Or if they are joining the army, what should they be clear about? I'm not saying that Christians should not join the army. That's not my argument. Please don't misunderstand. What I'm saying is, if you are a Sam Kamalason who got dismissed, and that means very serious consequences which will trouble him for the rest of his life. He is dismissed without pension, without gratuity, without any benefits. Not only that, if you are dismissed from the army, then lifelong you will suffer the consequences thereof. Your life is virtually ruined. You may be able to get some opportunities in the private sector, but there again with difficulty. But you will absolutely have no chance in any of the government setup. So, now here, a Christian who intends to join the army could consider the situation as follows. Well, I am deliberately making a choice to join the army. To join the army means to treat the requirements of the army, the discipline of the army, the authority of my army officers as way above the duty, obligation, or sense of loyalty that I owe to my religion. Now, if I cannot accept that, should I join the army or should I not join the army? That's point number one. Point number two. To what extent is the reservation of a Christian to participate in the religious functions of other religious communities spiritually valid? I know that from birth onwards, a certain negativity is being injected into the minds of all Christians regarding people of other faiths. Is this negativity spiritually valid? Is it something that Jesus Christ would have condoned, much less recommended? Or should a Christian really believe that there is only one God, Christianity being a monotheistic religion, 3-in-1 monotheistic religion, and therefore, even though those who practice other religions called by the same God by other names, ultimately worship, if it is worship, is offered to only one God, and that God is common to everyone. And therefore, what do these superficial details matter? The act of worship is an act of worship, and therefore, I find nothing wrong about, I'm not saying that is my position, I'm talking about how a Christian who intends to join the army could decipher this. I can still, while they worship God according to their rites, their lingo, their idioms, their terminologies, their rituals, their colors, their smells, their bells. I can concentrate on an established spiritual connection with the God I know through Jesus Christ. Now, that of course requires a very high order of spiritual development. So, should the Christian community take this into account and train people? For example, should there be a special training program for young Christians who intend to join the army for a career, to equip them to deal with such situations that are bound to arise and bound to arise more frequently henceforth, so that more and more lives, young lives, are not ruined in the process. Now, the third issue, an issue that Count Leo Tolstoy raised. Count Leo, this is not my view, I'm mentioning the source, Count Leo Tolstoy. He raises an issue. He raises the issue, if Christians who believe in the words of Jesus Christ as found in the Sermon on the Mount, particularly chapter 5 of Matthew's Gospel, can ever join any army. Because to join the army is to take the pledge that a soldier will love and serve his country above all else. And therefore, within the pledge that the soldier takes, the loyalty to the country takes precedence over the loyalty towards God. That's the reality. So, Tolstoy goes to the extreme extent of saying that a Christian cannot even take a pledge, because Jesus very explicitly prohibits taking pledges in the Sermon on the Mount. Do not swear by anything in the world. So when a Christian takes a pledge, he swears by the name of God, swears by the Bible, etc., etc. I remember some years ago when I had to participate in an inquiry procedure against an employee of St. Stephen's College. I also had to give my witness. So the representative of the accused employee, in order to embarrass me, told the inquiry officer, who was a retired High Court judge of the Delhi High Court, he said, we want the principal to be sworn in under the authority of the Bible. He must swear by the Bible. So the judge turned to me. I said, no, I will not swear by the Bible. He said, why? I said, it's absurd to swear by the Bible because the Bible tells me not to swear by it. He said, oh, is that so? So I said, okay, give me the Bible, I'll show it to you. And I showed him that section. He said, yeah, you're right, you're right. So, and in fact, Tolstoy goes to the extent of saying that if you are really a Christian and you go by the teachings of Jesus Christ, you cannot even participate in the practice of law. Well, I don't hold such extreme views. I'm just citing an example. Now, the final thing I want to say. Let me take an example from the Old Testament. The second book of Kings, chapter 5. The story of Naaman. Naaman comes to prophet Elisha, and he is healed of leprosy. But when he goes back to his country, Syria, he says, is it all right if I can join my king as he goes to worship in the temple of Ammon, the king's god? Because the king has a habit of leaning on me while he goes to his temple worship. And it's very difficult for me to excuse myself from it. Interestingly, the prophet allows him. Because there, the general, who is now convinced that that has absolutely no spiritual meaning or a divine significance, and therefore would rather not participate, he is under a professional duty to participate. And he cannot continue in that profession if he cannot discharge his official duties. And the general Naaman cannot seek exemption from the king from his primary duty to be with the king in this act of worship. Simply because he encountered a prophet and his eyes are opened, and now he realizes that all these rituals and things have no value. So the prophet, in good, sanctified common sense, allows him to continue that practice. And in this context, I may also hasten to add that Jesus doesn't say one word that is negative about any other religion. It's not that there weren't religions in that place, there were many, many religions. After all, that entire area had many tribal religions, all the various tribes, the Jebusites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Philistines, etc., etc., etc. They had their own religions. Jesus does not utter a single word of contempt or condemnation about any of those religions or the followers of any of the religions. Rather, he has a profound word of appreciation for the woman from Cana, the Canaanite woman who had her own religion. And he says, not even in Israel have I seen such faith. The only logic for saying that is she is different from the Jewish people in religion. Otherwise, there is no point in saying that. Not even in Israel have I seen such faith. So I think the time has come for us to address this general issue in a cool, calm, collected manner. And please don't let religious hotheads get into this and spoil the show. They're incapable of thinking rationally, and they're not even capable of considering the fact that the people who have to pay a huge price for the stupidities or the bigotries that they advocate, that religious bigots advocate, are very different from themselves. And they can say whatever they say and maybe make some money out of it or generate some income. But people who take their advice seriously or allow themselves to be influenced by their bigotry, they get ruined. So ultimately, let me conclude with the sanctified wisdom of Jesus Christ. When Jesus said, the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Or, to put it in general terms, religion is made for man and not man for religion. And therefore, no religious inhibition, no religious do's and don'ts, no religious prejudice or bigotry should be subscribed to the extent of ruining your life. Life is precious. The greatest value in this world is life. At the same time, it's a matter of great concern that Christian members of the armed forces now find themselves, if this case is any indication, in situation, this may not be as widespread as it may appear as a rare case. It will be extremely regrettable if Christian young men and maybe women who propose to join the army to serve the country with devotion and distinction find themselves in a situation in which their conscience is continually oppressed. They're coerced into situations and acts of even seemingly religious character, which does not agree with their core religious sensibility, conviction, and commitment. I think this is a very, very complex situation. This is a situation that merits further detailed examination. And I recommend that a serious minded, biblically valid, enlightened debate be undertaken on the basis of this episode in order to formulate spiritually valid guidelines for the young men and women of the Christian community so that they can pursue various professions without major hiccups in their spiritual life. Now, what starts in the army can very well spread to other walks of life. So I don't discount that possibility. Disciplinary action could be initiated against certain members of certain communities in the days ahead on various grounds. So what is one to do in such a situation? there's a pressing, urgent need to address this issue and to formulate valid guidelines to guide the young men and women of the community. Thank you. Jai Hind.